Intrusion's a cybersecurity company. We build software and hardware that monitor your network and then also protects your network from cybersecurity threats, malware, things of that nature. I run the product division of the company and also their quality assurance. Well, we were having trouble with our software development lifecycle. Things weren't really getting through the pipeline. And one of our trusted advisors had suggested you guys. And so we took a look and we're very happy we found you. Our biggest problems were things were getting stuck. We really couldn't monitor where they were getting stuck. We were moving very, very slow. Turns out that we were adding work and people were bypassing our SDLC and just working on whatever they wanted to work. And so just keeping track of everything and knowing what was going on was very, very difficult. One of the things we have is we have a founder who is still involved with the company who's very energetic. He doesn't mean any malice or anything of that nature, but he would just talk to the engineers about possible things of the future, and they would take that as instruction, which wasn't meant to be instruction. And they would start working on his ideas that he had talked to them about, and instead of working on what was planned for the sprint. And so we would never get the stuff that we had planned to get done because they're always working on just ideas and things that were exciting, and it just got in the way. One of the things that we were able to discover with Bloomfilter was stories were taking longer than 3 days, which is okay in Agile. But if all your stories are taking 9 to 12 days, then there's no predictability because no one can really estimate that large of a story. It let us know that our product owners needed to go ahead and reduce those story sizes by writing additional stories, like chopping them up into smaller bite-sized bites. And it allowed us to have a lot more predictability. And so not only did we move faster, but we actually were able to keep our commitments to the business. The biggest risk that we discovered was people were finishing software. Well, they were going code complete and throwing it over the wall to QA, and QA wasn't able to keep up with the volume coming through. It let us know that our risk was quality assurance because they were not properly staffed, nor did they have the technology to process the user stories that were coming through. So we could get a lot of code done, but we couldn't get a lot of software done because we couldn't get the testing completed. What it did was it put a focus on the planned stories and the completed stories. So it tracks stories that you plan to do and lets you know if you're actually moving on the right trend. And it's different than Jira, because Jira would take any story and put it on your trend line, whereas this would only take your sprint plan stories and put it on your trend line. And that allowed us to understand when we were having scope creep, people were adding things to the backlog, or people were carrying things over from other sprints. And so you might have planned, say, 5 stories to get done this sprint, but you carried from the last sprint another 3 stories. And you were wondering, why am I not hitting my numbers? Because at the end of it, you completed 5 sprints, 5 stories, but 3 of them were from the last sprint. So you didn't hit what was predictable. You didn't hit what you planned to do. And so it uncovered that and allowed us to address that. Instead of just carrying the stories over from one sprint to the next, they had to go through sprint planning now. And so they had to be approved to be put into the next sprint so they would count. The biggest area of software waste that we had was the wait time between different stages of the software. Like I said, the QA one was a big one because we had user stories that would sit a week in waiting for QA to process it. Then we had user stories that would sit there and review and wait 3 or 4 days for code review and merge requests to be completed. And that wait time was a tremendous amount of waste. And so not only did we change the way that we did QA, but it also changed the way that we did reviews. So users had to actually, if you put a story in review, now you had to review another user story that somebody else had put in there and do the pull request, which reduced the waste there tremendously, and which sped us up about probably 30 to 40%. We just had a lot of waste that were sitting there, wait time waste is what I'm talking about. And it's very typical in the industry, but it's very difficult to track with any reporting that's out there, except for Bloomfilter allows us to do that. One of the ones is the velocity measurement, where it measures from when a user story was written to when a story begins to be worked on. What that allowed us to do is to see if the number was too low, which we had a lot of 1 to 2 days showing up there. It showed us that our POs were writing stories in the middle of the sprint or right before they're being worked, which sounds good, but that tells me it also didn't go through any sort of planning if that's your average. Whereas your average needs to be around 7 to 10 days because you had sprint planning, and then you go into the sprint and then they're working on that, and you need to know about when they work it. Some of those stories are going to be worked at the second half of the sprint, which is going to be 8 to 14 days, and some are going to work at the beginning. So your average should come around 7 days if you're working planned stories. If you're always reacting and just getting whipped around as a development team, you're going to have a shorter timeline. Or if you're going to have a greater timeline, that tells you that you're not staffed appropriately, or you're not working on the right user stories because the dates are too great. It really comes down to predictability, and we did that through multiple of the metrics that were provided to us. A lot of people want to think speed is king in software development lifecycle. It's a close second to predictability, because the business really needs to know when things are coming out. Especially as a publicly traded company, if you go to the street and say, we're going to have a cloud version of your software available in Q4, you have to have it ready in Q4. And even if you move faster or slower, it needs to be in Q4. If not, you can have some serious issues going along, and our investors would feel deceived. So predictability is really what's key in software, and that allows you to adjust your staffing. It allows you to adjust your product roadmaps. It allows you to adjust your marketing. It is king. Velocity is nice, but it takes years to get predictable velocity, because user stories are all different, and velocity is going to go up and down, up and down. But if you can get predictability stable, you are king. They first thought I came up with the charts, and they thought I was a genius. So I didn't take credit for it. I let them know I got it from Bloomfilter. But the visibility and the way the information is presented, even people who are not from an engineering or a product background were able to understand the throughput that was going through, and if you're on target or off target. And so I was able to share with the executive team in a way that they understood if we were doing well or not. And it also allowed me to address staffing needs. So I could go in there and use the historicals and show that, hey, engineering needs more front-end developers, or needs more back-end developers, or we need more QA, or we need a piece of software to help with QA. And it made it a lot more defensible. I actually already have recommended it, and yes, I would. The reasoning for that is the visibility that it gives you without the amount of work. You might be able to export, things into Excel and create your own charts, but the amount of work and time that takes is tremendous. And if you're ahead of product, you'd much rather be working on the product than working on a bunch of graphs. And so, but at the same time, for your product roadmap, you need predictability. And it gives me the ability to have more time for product, and also gives me the predictability so I can adjust the product roadmap. And so therefore, my peers, I highly suggest it on a regular basis, just on those notes. It's given the Intrusion actually a better reputation than it had. We had missed a few key deliverables we had told the street from the prior leadership of the company. And then after we implemented Bloomfilter and some other changes, we've now been able to keep our word to our investors. When we say something's ready, it's ready, and it will be ready on time. And that has changed the entire perspective of how we're viewed in the industry, and it's helped a lot.